Did you do that? Sorry, that wasn't really. Yes.
So, according to the World Health Organization, every 30 seconds, the loss of a loved one due to suicide shatters the lives of families and friends. In the United States, suicide is the third leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds and claims the lives of over 4,000 young people per year, and is the second leading cause of death in 25 to 34-year-olds. So suicide and mental health. These are two really heavy issues, and like so many heavy issues that need addressing, they're immensely stigmatized, making them difficult to confront. So suicide isn't a particularly pleasant topic. It's tragic, it's painful, it's complicated, and it's frightening. But it happens. It's tragic, it's real, and it's not going to go away if we don't address it. Suicide doesn't usually come up in day-to-day conversation, and unfortunately, all too often those who are forced to talk about it are those who are affected and have felt its tendencies or have been left behind by its victims. And even then, they speak the word suicide in hushed tones or don't use the word suicide itself. So why is it so hard to talk about? How do we approach such a sensitive subject? Suicide needs to be talked about, but it needs to be talked about in the right way. A moment ago, I mentioned the word victim, which is often associated with the word survivor. So who are the survivors of suicide? Well, there are absolutely those survivors who have attempted self-harm and survived. And for those of you out there, you are loved, and you are not alone, and we are here for you. And if you need a hug after this talk, or a talk after this talk, anything really, we'll be here. But there's also a group of survivors. There's also a group of survivors who emerge from the aftermath of a suicide. Those who are left behind by their loved ones. These survivors wake up every day trying to decide just what it is that they could have done differently to make the pain go away from the one that they lost. And they just can't figure out why their loved one felt so alone. And they can't figure out why their loved one didn't know that they were there for them, or worse, they can't figure out why they weren't there for them, even if they were. And they just can't forgive themselves for not making that last call, or visiting that last time, or not saying I love you.
So how do you talk about something that's so hard to talk about? How do you talk about something whose name itself can be triggering? Here's what we did. We created a social campaign called Kill the Cliche. This campaign aims to combat the type of speech that these survivors of suicide are most affected by. The phrase killing myself and the corresponding hashtag KMS. So often I hear things like, oh, that test was so hard, I'm gonna kill myself. Or I see someone spill coffee all over her shirt and she says, oh, I just wanna kill myself. If you search the hashtag KMS on Twitter, you'll see all sorts of tweets, ranging from I'm so unphotogenic, hashtag KMS, to my B-day is over. Now I can go back to hating my life, hashtag KMS. Think about it. Your test was hard, so you want to kill yourself? You can't take a great selfie right now, so you want to kill yourself? You stained your t-shirt, so you want to kill yourself? Or better yet, your birthday ended, so you want to kill yourself? Why don't we strive to kill this cliche of killing yourself instead? In creating this campaign, this is exactly what we have aimed to do. So the Kill the Cliche campaign, yes, the name is ambiguous. It's not the Suicide Sucks campaign or the Mental Health Help campaign or the Please Stop Pretending Like Suicide and Depression are not real issues because they are campaign, but call it that if you will. So what exactly is a cliche? That's something we've been asked. A cliche is merely a phrase or expression that has been used so often it is no longer interesting, or a phrase or opinion that betrays a lack of original thought. So in using the cliche killing myself, you are turning suicide into something trivial, into something commonplace, into a figure of speech.
All right, so
In order to reach these goals and spread the message that Sarah was just talking about, we implemented several techniques, both online and offline. We began by creating several social media accounts, such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, along with the awesome website that Aubrey ran. We first started out posting Sarah's infographic and my print ad, and then followed with relevant articles and pictures to kind of keep our public engaged. So with this in mind, our original goal was to get as many Facebook likes as possible. So we each shared the Kill the Cliche page with our friends. But unfortunately, to put it bluntly, we don't have very many friends. So it was evident we needed to make some connections. So after searching through over 1,000 organizations on the UF Student Involvement site, we found a few that looked like good potential partners. And I'm sure they would have been if they ever contacted us back. So we were left on our own, and our next move was to print out both the infographic and the print ad to put up around campus. So after visiting the copy shop, we realized this wasn't really feasible money-wise. So we resorted to guerrilla marketing with chalk. Left on our own, we decided to chalk everything in sight, just one afternoon. We spent hours just chalking everything from tabletops to iron fences and even trees. And conveniently, we did all of this right before a rainstorm. So, left on, before we had to try any more circulation attempts, we decided that we needed to change our goal. We felt it would be a lot more meaningful to have people take our pledge rather than to simply ask them to like our Facebook page. We felt it would make it more of like a personal connection for them, or a personal commitment, since they actually had to sign their name to it and provide a reason why killing the cliche was important to them. So trying to do this online didn't really turn out the way we had hoped, although we did have a few responses that were fairly enjoyable to read from the website. My favorite being from my boyfriend. Since something we attempted to do online seemed to be working, we decided we needed to go outside and do a second attempt at chalking. Strategically, we did this the day before. We were planning on going out tabling in Turlington, which Sarah will elaborate more on later. The second attempt was a lot more successful, and we expanded our locations to include the Plaza de Americas, where a lot of people go to eat Krishna lunch and just in passing. And this time, we checked the weather beforehand. Though we ran into several issues throughout the semester, the ones I have just talked about were pretty trivial compared to the other more complex dilemmas that arose surrounding the very existence of our campaign. We were faced with the issue of whether or not Kill the Cliche, whose main purpose was to stop the presence of emotional triggers, had gone so far as to actually be an emotional trigger itself. A young woman brought this to our attention through a Facebook message, and she suggested that the screenshots of the hashtag KMS that we had posted as examples of what we wanted to discourage might actually be triggering in and of themselves. So, of course, Sarah quickly responded saying that we hadn't intended for them to be hurtful and explained that they were just there to illustrate the kind of hurtful speech that we wanted to discourage. But even so, it was really concerning to hear that our campaign had crossed that line between being or bringing awareness and being an emotional trigger. In fact, the day before, we decided not to post a picture that someone had sent us because it was a bit graphic, even though it was a perfect example of what we were trying to discourage. Also, on a more personal note, it proved really difficult to advocate for suicide prevention and awareness when people automatically assume that one or all of us has had depression or has had suicidal thoughts in the past. We could feel them judging us whenever we had to explain the situation or the campaign to them, and we ultimately realized for ourselves that stigma is real. All of these examples, once again, stems from questions that Aubrey and Sarah brought up earlier, which is, we know we need to talk about suicide, but how? How does one approach such a sensitive subject without it backfiring? And how can you remove stigma on something if you can't even talk about it?
Those are all great questions. Unfortunately, none has a definite answer, only our attempts, one of which includes tabling at Turlington. So we decided on this whole pledge idea, and we realized that the simple sign-up button on our Facebook page just wasn't cutting it. We had to think bigger, much bigger actually. So we, well, Aubrey really, because it might be illegible if I try to, created this banner out of everyday materials, some paint and a bed sheet. We set up a table in Turlington Plaza on Gainesville's hottest day of the year so far, and encouraged people to physically, rather than digitally, sign a pledge. We aimed for 100 signatures, and the pattern continued. We fell short of our goal. However, although we didn't have the masses flocking to our table, even though we advertised for free candy, we did have the opportunity to meet some really interesting individuals who were kind enough to share their stories with us. I think that ultimately, we connected with a smaller group of people on a more intimate basis. But since the subject of our campaign is so sensitive, I think this outcome is actually ideal. One man's story in particular really resonated with me. He came up to the table and he said, well, I have to ask, what's the cliche? And I told him the gist of our campaign, and he agreed with our mission, and he was on his way. But 5 minutes later, he came back, and he said, you know what other cliche you should kill? I'm so OCD. People say it all the time, and it's offensive to me. And he proceeded to tell us how it's a disorder that he's going to have to live with for the rest of his life. And what he said next just really hit me. He said, unless you stayed awake all night because you can't get up and walk on the wooden planks and have to call your brother to come put pillows down on the floor, you don't know what OCD is. And this sent chills down my spine because although I removed the phrase killing myself from my speech, I know I still say I'm so OCD without giving it a second thought. This campaign was originally designed with the cliche killing myself in mind. But there are really so many other cliches of which we should be mindful. I'm so OCD is a prime example, but so is that so gay, or that's so retarded, or that test just raped me. Think about what you're saying. Be mindful of what you're saying. Be sensitive to people's pain. Instead of saying killing myself, let's all agree to practice kind, mindful speech.
Depression is a serious issue. It's a complex mental disorder that arises from a variety of internal and external circumstances. But it's not the kind of disorder that's excused in school. It's not the kind of disorder that people like to notice, and it is the kind of disorder that can go unnoticed until it kills. Utilizing suicide as a figure of speech, or perhaps even worse, reducing it to the notion of a hashtag, is simply careless. To the many individuals who suffer from severe depression, or have suffered the tremendous grief brought about by a loved one's suicide, this type of mindless speech can serve as a detrimental reminder to their pain and their loss. By using suicide as a figure of speech and remarking that you could like to kill yourself in day-to-day speech, you are being insensitive. You are not adding meaningful content to the dialogue, and you are not practicing kind mindful speech. So let me repeat. Suicide is not trivial, and suicide is not a figure of speech. Because would you really rather kill yourself than have to hear that song on the radio one more time? Or kill yourself rather than reading that one last page of that textbook? Or kill yourself rather than walking home in the rain? No. Please, just stop. Change the station. Head to Hogwarts. I will personally loan you my umbrella. Just don't threaten us with the thought of losing you, because for some of us, it's just too much to bear. Thank you.